please join me in welcoming Andrea Mitchell to the podium.
Thank you, Dean Robertson. Thank you to the parents and the partners and the spouses and the friends, and to the fabulous Wharton MBA class of 2013. Thanks for inviting me. I never thought I'd be in the palestra for this sort of an occasion. This is really pretty overwhelming. When the dean invited me to speak here today, my immediate reaction was, why me? You heard him say that I was College of Liberal Arts for Women, English literature, but more to the point, I am the woman who lived with the chairman of the Federal Reserve for almost 2 decades without ever learning how to balance a checkbook. But then again, neither did the Fed. So if it wasn't because of my deep understanding of finance or economics, I had to figure out what I have learned in my career covering politics and foreign policy that might be applicable to you. Well, some of my most enduring lessons, in fact, were learned right here in Philadelphia. I was a newly minted graduate of what we then called, as I say, the College of Liberal Arts for Women. Penn was, for all intents and purposes, co-ed, but not yet officially. I hadn't even turned 20 when we graduated, but I was recruited by Westinghouse Broadcasting, then the owner of KYW Radio and Television, and stations around the country as well. And I was recruited for their management training program. I dreamed of becoming a correspondent, until they told me that women could not go into news, only advertising or public relations. And my dream was journalism. So a week after graduation, I gave up, quit what was then considered a plum position. I asked instead to have an entry-level newsroom job as what they then called a copy boy. That was essentially ripping wire copy, running coffee, making calls on the overnight shift at KYW News Radio. The first lesson I learned from the experience looking back is, don't settle. Follow your dreams. Be a risk taker. Work should be joyful. For me, all these years later, it is. The second lesson, once I proved myself and became a reporter, was not to back down when dealing with bullies. Your stomach can be churning, your knees can be shaking. Don't let them see that you're afraid. And that goes for the tough law and order cop who then ran Philadelphia in those days, Frank Rizzo, or in fact, years later, Ronald Reagan's White House Chief of Staff, Donald Regan, who threatened to get me fired for my reports on the Iran-Contra scandal. In the end, Rizzo and I made our peace. As for Don Regan, when he made international headlines at the first Reagan-Gorbachev summit in Geneva in 1985 for saying that women did not care about arms control because they didn't understand technical issues like throw weight, I then asked him to define throw weight during a live Today Show interview. He couldn't. In the end, the imperious chief of staff hung up the phone on Nancy Reagan once too many times, and she got him fired. Another key to living a meaningful life is, as the dean said, curiosity. Be adventurous, whether pursuing physical or intellectual challenges, and be adaptable. Can you imagine life without cell phones or the internet? When I started out in radio here in Philadelphia, we did not even have portable tape recorders or audio cassettes. In some ways, it was simpler. All I needed to call in breaking news was a dime and a phone booth. Ask your parents about phone booths. There was a downside. To conduct radio interviews in the field, I had to carry about a 50-pound reel-to-reel tape recorder on my shoulder. During my first years in Washington as a White House correspondent traveling with Ronald Reagan, our NBC team actually communicated among ourselves on the road via walkie-talkies. Then we got the first Motorola cell phones, the first generation of cell phones. They were giant, enormous. They were the size of a shoe. Covering political campaigns was again transformed in 1992. Instead of flying from airport to airport rally as we had for generations, the Clinton-Gore bus tours forced us to reinvent our campaign coverage. We were editing nightly news stories every night in a specially equipped RV while rolling across the country following the candidates at their roadside rallies. One of the things we learned was that Bill Clinton would stop no matter how few people were along the road. At a crossroad at 2 in the morning, he would stop, even when people on his staff would say, you know, those were just some drunks coming out of a bar. We would barely finish the late night, early morning assignments in time to get them on the morning news. Now the changes are, of course, even more dramatic. I can broadcast from Kabul or Darfur on a portable uplink, in a pinch, shooting my own video and emailing my pictures and voice track on my laptop, while constantly updating my stories on Twitter. Social media. Of course, a mixed blessing, revolutionizing democratic movements as we've seen in the Arab Spring, but also empowering lone wolf terrorists as we saw in Boston. In fact, what is our greatest national security threat? According to former Joint Chiefs Chairman Mike Mullen, in an interview I did with him last week for the Pete Peterson Foundation, it's cyber war. So adapting to the challenges of new technologies is only a first step. You'll also have to learn to work as part of a team. In my business, you rarely break a story by yourself. I get all the glory. We don't do all the work. The dirty little secret is that the people in front of the camera, we write our stories, we report our stories, but we could not be on television if there weren't a wonderful team behind us. Even the best reporters need a great producer, a great editor, a great camera person. And the best organizations, no matter what you do, will learn how to work together as a team. It is a rare day that I am not asking Pete Williams on the Justice Beat to check something out with the FBI, or trading emails with Richard Engel, our star foreign correspondent, to compare sources. Getting a scoop is fun. There's a lot of glory in it. But so is beating the competition as part of a winning team. And as our own Pete Williams proved again in Boston, don't forget the fundamentals. Facts, indeed, are stubborn things. Another fundamental to a successful life is character, living a life that is ethical, both professionally and personally. You cannot separate the two. And as many of you have already learned, there is enormous satisfaction in service and philanthropy. No matter what the scale, I cannot put a price on what my involvement with this great university has meant to me, how much I have learned here over the years, in the years since I graduated. I also urge you to be mentors. It is enormously satisfying. I've been fortunate to have a succession of very smart interns, many from Penn, great young producers and other trainees. And they have now all gone on to bigger things. There has not been a single failure among them over the years. I am so proud. They're all part of my extended family. And in truth, I learn a lot more from them and from my relationships with them than they learn from me. And finally, a word to the nearly 380 of you, the 45 percenters of this amazing class who are women, the highest percentage of women graduates of any business school in America, and the 4th year in a row that Wharton has surpassed 40%. It was quite a different landscape in my day. Back in 1968, 7 women graduated from the Wharton MBA program, and in '69, there were 5 women graduates. Back then, all of us women, we were struggling with conflicts over the war in Vietnam and civil rights, as well as the fledgling women's movement. Our brothers and our boyfriends were trying to figure out what to do about the draft. Women didn't know how to crack the glass ceiling. And all these years later, we're still facing some of these same gender challenges, not only in my business, but in politics and, of course, in business, where there are still only a handful of women CEOs in the Fortune 100. Tomorrow, we're thrilled to have among our honorary degree recipients Ursula Burns, a pioneer at Xerox and a champion of STEM education for women, and Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the internationally recognized finance minister of Nigeria and a long-standing veteran prior to that at the World Bank. And tell yourself, if you tell yourself, in fact, that diversity and gender equity don't matter, I ask all of you, ask yourselves whether the Pentagon would still be ignoring sexual assaults in the military if a rising number of women senators hadn't started raising holy hell. Still, your generation, as was mine, is once again engulfed in a cultural debate about our roles. Should we lean in or lean out? Do we follow Sheryl Sandberg or Anne-Marie Slaughter? The writer Elsa Walsh added her voice to this debate last week by writing in the Washington Post that for many women with children, the equation is a lot more complicated. She says she got a torrent of emailed responses, and about half came from men, saying that they are also struggling with the questions of work-life balance. On this Mother's Day, I have to say I am hardly an expert on having it all, since many of my choices were either made unconsciously, with apologies to Dr. Freud, or made for me. But I have learned that if you love what you do, if you contribute to improving your community and to improving civil society, you will not end up drowning in regrets. I've been privileged to have seen the world and lived history, yes, only as an observer, but with a front row seat. Standing only yards from Ronald Reagan at the Brandenburg Gate when he declared, "Tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev." Broadcasting live when Begin and Sadat signed the Camp David Accords. And 14 years later, when Bill Clinton prodded Rabin and Arafat to shake hands. And I've seen too many tragedies, from my earliest days as a reporter, that first year in 1968 when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy were both gunned down, to the devastation in Haiti and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Here at home, I've also seen our politics descend into mindless debates lacking in principle or substance, and yes, often abetted and aided by provocateurs in the media. Still, despite the cacophony and decline in civil discourse, we're seeing changes just in those last few years that tell me that we can appeal to our better natures. Your generation is so much smarter, so much more idealistic, so much better educated, and so much more tolerant. Only this week, Delaware became the 11th state to recognize gay marriage. We are a more diverse nation. And who knows, self-interest could even prompt Congress to compromise on immigration reform, resolving one of the most vexing moral and economic dilemmas of our time. So in this arena that has witnessed so many classic Ivy and Big Five matches, go forth with not just confidence, but with conviction, not just pride, but with principles. As a Wharton MBA, you have already won the lottery. My generation has left you quite a mess. It's your turn to fix it. Congratulations.